Fake it until you make it. You've heard that advice your entire career, and maybe you even given that advice to someone else. But here's what no one tells you, especially if you're a leader. That advice is quietly destroying your visibility. Every time you show up in public, on a stage, on camera, or even in a meeting, it feels like you're performing instead of just being yourself. Well, this video is for you. Today, we're unpacking why performing instead of being yourself is terrible for leadership and business, and why the fix is not more confidence. Hi there. Welcome to Visibility is Power TV. I'm communication and visibility strategist Rashonda Pratt, and I'm glad you're here for another impactful video. You're accomplished. You know your work. People trust you in private. You're the go-to person. But the second it becomes public, the second you step into the spotlight, something shifts. You get polished, you get on. But when it's over, you are absolutely drained. You're a little empty, maybe feeling a little bit of a fraud. And you keep telling yourself these lies. I just need to be more confident. Once I find my brand voice, this will feel natural. This is just what leadership feels like. But here's what I've learned in my own experience. This is what I've seen 20 years working behind the scenes as a television news producer, and the work that I do with high capacity leaders just like you. That exhaustion isn't weakness, and this isn't a confidence problem. It's actually a gap. You're not tired because you're not confident. You're tired because you are maintaining a gap. Now, here's what I need you to know about this presence gap, I like to call it. There are actually two versions of you in every public moment. And I want you to think about this as I define it and see where you land. You have the present self, which is who you are. And then you have the presented self, is who you perform. The distance between them is what I like to call the presence gap. Performance is the labor of trying to hold on to those two parts. That's why showing up feels like work. That's why creating content and video feels really hard. This is why sharing your voice and your insight and your thought leadership, you get nervous because you are trying to maintain a gap. Now, you've probably seen a video somewhere here where I've talked to you about the confidence gap. And these two, the presence gap and the confidence gap, are cousins. The confidence gap is when you hedge what you should say. The presence gap is when you perform who you are. And it's both, they're very different, and they each have a different fix. So let's get into this whole fake it until you make it, because I heard that a lot in my career, and especially when I started moving into a leadership position. Fake it till you make it sounds like confidence advice. And it's actually what is widening the gap on purpose. It really trains you to build a self that you have to keep performing and maintaining, which never ends. And here's the part that's specific to leaders like you and I. You can build an audience on a persona, but you cannot build authority on a self you have to keep performing. Think about that. The paradox is really harder. You can't perform authority. It has to be something that you own, and that's something that is really who you are. Because people don't feel your words, they feel your effort, and effort reads as distance. So when you perform instead of showing up, you're usually borrowing from one of these three places. And I'm going to give you a really practical example of what I've seen working as a television news producer. You borrow from three places. Number one, a borrowed voice. You sound like the template of authority, not like you. Borrowed posture. You perform leader instead of leading as yourself. And borrowed permission. This is where you wait to feel credentialed enough to be fully present. Now, I want you to notice that with borrowed voice, borrowed posture, and borrowed permission, a lot of this is very much akin to executive presence. This is why I have shared that we're not leaning into executive presence. What is winning is visible leadership. Because the issue with borrowing someone else's voice, posture, and permission, you may attract people to that voice, but they're attracted to the voice and not the real you. And I saw this a lot working in television news, especially when we would have new reporters. There's a thing called the anchor voice. You probably have heard it if you do a Google search, even right here on YouTube, or you search on TikTok, you will find this very nasally, high pitched anchor voice. And for many years, especially with new reporters, they would lean into that voice because it would seem like that voice is stronger. It would seem like you have more authority. And what I would have to do oftentimes is give them permission as a TV news as a TV news producer and as an executive producer to use their voice. I would tell them, if this is not your normal voice, when you're having a conversation with me and someone meets you in public and they experience one voice on air and another voice in person, it really starts to impact your credibility. So I have to give them permission to lean into who you really are, your real voice, and your real voice is enough. Now, the thing you have to understand with every one of these borrowed voice, posture, and permission, every one of them pulls the presented self farther from the present self. The wider the gap, the harder the performance, and the more invisible the real you becomes. You don't close the presence gap with more confidence. You don't close it with a better persona. You close it by changing where you source from. In your next high stakes moment, catch the question running in your head. Most leaders are secretly asking, how should a leader sound here? See, going back to some of what we've been taught about executive presence. That question sources from the template and it widens the gap. I want you to replace it with what actually is true for me here. That one question really collapses the gap in real time because now you're sourcing from yourself and not from performance. Authenticity, transparency, and vulnerability are the new currency. You don't have to perform authority. You source it from identity and not a template. So every time you perform, instead of showing up, something is quietly accumulating. The exhaustion compounds. I think this is why we experience a lot of burnout because people are not showing up truly as their authentic self because maintenance never ends. The trust erodes because people sense the distance even when they can't really name it. The message only you can carry never fully lands because a performed self can't deliver a real assignment. Your presence is stewardship. A performed version of you cannot carry what you are actually assigned to carry. The leaders who become unmistakably aren't the best performers, they're the most present. They stop holding the gap open, and the room finally felt real for them. So here's your next move this week. The next time you show up, stop asking, how should this sound? How should a leader sound? And start asking, what's true for you? And say that. Now, if performing is the symptom, misalignment is the root, and you can't stop performing a message you haven't gotten clear on. And so I want to invite you to an opportunity right here below this video. We have ways that you can connect and we can work together on your messaging so you can be confident in telling your story, confident in sharing your message. Listen, I only work with a limited number of leaders at this level, and every engagement really starts with a real conversation, and it's time to have that real conversation. I also want to invite you to subscribe because every week I'm giving you the strategy, the mindset to move from hidden expert to recognized authority. So, right now in the comments, let me know, where do you feel the gap the most? On stage, on camera, or in the room? I promise I read every single comment. Remember, visibility without alignment is just noise, but aligned visibility, that's power. See you soon.